Folks, you're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of, I'll say the alleged issue, because it's hard to get accurate numbers of youth unemployment in China, and as a sidebar or subset of that conversation, youth unemployment in other places, India, Pakistan, and so on, Africa. So China supposedly has 21, depending on whose numbers you look at, between 21 and 23% youth unemployment. So somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of people in the ages of 16 to 24 are unemployed in China. Now, given the population of China is give or take 1.4 billion, it's interesting looking at the numbers. They say unemployment rate of 21 to 23% means that there's unemployment of 6 million. So that would suggest, therefore, there's only 30 million people in the whole of China between the ages of 16 and 24 out of a population of 1.4 billion. That seems to be hard to get your head around, those sort of numbers. If you've got a 1.4 billion total population, but your entire unemployment population, which is a fifth, so there's only 30 million people in the ages of 16 to 24 in the entire thing of China, that's hard to believe. Now, there are other numbers where they say, well, it's actually urban unemployment or city unemployment, but they don't define what are the cities. Is it all cities? Is it cities over 1 million people, cities over 500,000, or so it's very hard to actually drill down and get numbers. But let's just run on the face of it, saying, well, there's this unemployment. Now, to further complicate things, when they categorize unemployment, there in some places they say unemployment means if you're still at school. Because if you're not working, or if you're still at school rather, or it could be college, or maybe you're going back to school to do a master's or something like that, it means that you're not working, you are therefore unemployed. But all of those 6 million people could be studying at senior high school or university. So you really wouldn't call them unemployed in any meaningful sense of the word. When they finish their studies and they're out looking for work and not working, that would be unemployment, but that's not how they categorize it. So it's very difficult, again, to get a handle on it. But in a lot of instances, these children, especially when they go to university or they're studying some post-grad course, they're using they're working part-time or they're studying part-time and looking for part-time work, so they can be unemployment in that category. But again, it's difficult to navigate through the numbers in any meaningful sense. But nonetheless, the view is that China has to have a certain rate of growth, economic growth, and that's real growth, not the numbers that the propaganda numbers that the party pushes out, but real growth in order to provide jobs. Now, the Chinese previously have been able to count on, or still, that if you can't find jobs in China, you just go and emigrate to a Western country and try your luck there. And large numbers of, when Australia had a problem with, or an issue with boats arriving, there were large numbers of Chinese workers coming to Australia. These weren't degree workers or qualified people; they were just grunt labourers. But nonetheless, but I just want to look at the wider issue of unemployment in the third world. Now, there was a time if the unemployment rate in China was 20%, 30%, 50%, 1,000,000%, it didn't really matter. That was China's problem. It was the problem of issue of China's government to solve it. They had to pursue economic policies that are more likely to give people jobs and so on. So and the same for any other country. That's now all different. The globalists have changed that. So if you've got workers you can't use in that country, then you can just flood them into the West, and we'll create an artificial economy, a completely artificial economy for them to work in the West. and which will, of course, degrade Western living standards and degrade Western purchasing power, will degrade market competitiveness in the West, which will degrade market competition in the West. But who cares? The globalists are in charge, and that's what they want to do. And that's what they are doing. So mass unemployment in places like India and China are real issues for the West to be concerned about. And just the level of it, there was there was a trade mission touring India not that long ago, a few weeks ago, and the German politicians there were were telling the most outrageous lies, globalist lies, globalist scripted lies, where they were saying that Germany is critically short of workers. We just don't have any workers. We've got no fucking workers. Oh, the jobs that are going unfilled, which is a globalist mantra right across the Western world. We hear it too in Australia. It's Britain. It's everywhere. So I'm hoping your Indian viewers and listeners will take heed and come masses of you. We want gazillions of you to come to Germany and to do what jobs? What are these jobs that are going unfilled? I mean, what a load of bullshit. So this is a real issue across the Western world. So I see this growing mass of unemployed people, be they in Africa, be they wherever, and they'll be actively assisted and aided and abetted to come legally, illegally, it doesn't matter, to come to the West to further degrade Western standards of living. I just want to talk a little bit about China and how they got stand. That China is far richer than it ever should have been on its own merit, only because the globalists transferred lots of Western jobs to China, manufacturing jobs and other jobs. And with that went millions of well-paid middle manager jobs, technology jobs in machine maintenance and these sort of things, jobs that paid a decent way. All those jobs are gone. So the guy that lost the job, the $60,000 a year job working in the factory, the only other job now he can get is working in Walmart for $30,000 a year. So that's been a massive shift in social economics in the West as these jobs were shipped off to China. Now, in order to fill these jobs that the globalist Westerners were pouring into China, they took the illiterate peasants from the rural. China was a nation of agricultural, living hand-to-mouth subsistence peasants, sort of 40 years ago. A very small industrial class and urban class that weren't servants or flunkies or coolies for the goons yet. So the Chinese moved these hand-to-mouth peasants from the farms and moved them to the city to work in the factories. This gave the artificial impression of sudden economic boom, but it really wasn't. It was far from that. Peasant farmers that live hand-to-mouth and by barter, they don't conduct hardly any transactions that are measurable in any economic sense, because they really don't use money for anything. If you're growing a surplus of rice, then you barter it with the guy down the road for his vegetables or his the eggs from his chickens or something. And if you've got a surplus of this, you then go out and buy petrol for your tractor and a lot of these peasants didn't have any sort of automation at all. They were still using oxen and the old wooden plows that they were using 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. So when you move people like that from those non-financial existences and you move them to the city where they work in a factory, then they're being paid a wage. They're paying rent on a place or something. They're buying food at the local shop. So suddenly everything they do is a financial transaction, and they've come from a situation where nothing they did is a financial transaction. So this gives the impression of this sudden surge in productivity, but really it's not. It's just moving things around within the economy and measuring them in different ways. So they're moving all these people from the country to the city, and bear in mind, China's got a massive population. So they could easily move 100, 200 million people from the country to the city without even blinking, because that was the size of the population overall. And these people filled the jobs in the city. Now, a lot of the Chinese jobs were in things like the jobs China had been creating were in things like bullshit education classes where they got bullshit diplomas, and the government recently shut that down, which put a lot of people out of work and put people back to the government-controlled institutions. The concern there is more ideological than anything else. And then going into things like real estate and those sort of occupations. So not many people are actually recently. This is so the second wave of jobs that China's creating in the services and so on don't really pay as well, and there's not as many of them, and they rely on a very frothy, very very buoyant economic circumstance to create jobs there. And China's the amount of manufacturing that China's involved in now, and its ability to produce high quality goods at an affordable price, that's slipping a bit. So they're losing their edge. The West is consuming less in some of these areas as well. So I don't think China's in a particularly good place, and I don't see that they're going to, on an indigenous level, be able to generate enough demand to create the sort of consumer economy that we see in the West, or have seen. That slipping now as well, of course. So I see this as an issue where there's going to be, and is currently, vast numbers of Chinese that have very high expectations. They've got their bullshit degrees and so on. And this idea that the Chinese education is incredible and fantastic, and that everyone's a genius. They're very good at swatting the Chinese, as indeed a lot of the Indians and Japanese are absolutely masters at swatting. But they're not, certainly the ones I've worked with that are well qualified, they're nothing special or to speak about, or inevitably some will be, but as a general rule, I've never been impressed by or hardly ever impressed by the Chinese PhDs and masters and so on. They've got expectations that far outstrip their abilities, and I think this is part of the issue in China at the moment in terms of creating jobs. But I just want to look across the world in general. There's everyone in the third world now has had their appetites for a first world lifestyle whetted, and they're all salivating at the thought of a first world lifestyle. And they're in places, parts of the world that are never going to be able to generate that. Africa and all these places, they're fucking basket cases. India too. India's a fucking basket case. There's a small elite live like kings, but the rest of them are dirt poor peasants. But this means there's a huge appetite now for, well, I want to go where the first world lifestyle is, which means I've got to go to the first world. And you literally have hundreds of millions of people around the world, whether it be in India or Africa or Pakistan or China for that matter, that have no confidence in the ability of their own government or nation to be able to put something like that together. They're all corrupt basket cases. So they go, that's all right, I'll just come to the West. Now, when you look at the hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people that want to do it, and the globalists salivating at the thought of all that cheap, coolie peasant labour, the recipe is there for the globalists to continue to totally fuck over the West. But what to do about it? Well, we've got to return, among other things, we have to return the Western economies to a market-based economy. Now, that doesn't mean laissez-faire, open slather or something like that. I don't mean that. But the idea of purposefully and willfully creating artificial economies based on third world peasant labour, that's not the way to go, nor has it ever been. So along with returning the rule of law and due legal process and immigration on the basis of actual need and things like that, these are the steps the West needs to take. Now, will that mean that there'll be basket case conditions in these other countries? Well, sure it will. But they've always been that way and continue to be that, no matter what they do. And the idea of stealing jobs and wealth from the West to try and balance it out is bullshit, and is doomed to fail anyway. They'll waste it. The West is less likely to waste it, or certainly not waste it on the scale that they do. So I think China's growth and China's prosperity moment is all artificial anyway. It's been based on the globalist West transferring, stealing Western jobs from the West and sticking them into China, which has given an artificial boost. There's the artificial boost of all those subsistence peasants being moved to the city. That was the second sort of layer of boosting. And then the artificial use of the exchange rate with the US dollar to make Chinese goods artificially cheap on the export market. These things in combination and I think if you look at where the value add has been in the Chinese state, they're not increasing or adding value at anything like the rate they need to create the sort of good jobs that that are going to be wanted by the youth. The youth then will want to clamour to come to the West, and I think that'll be an absolute disaster given the scale of it. You've been a Tacitus today. You're a pushback channel. Thank you for listening.